tipped his hat to an empty chair every single day for 7 years. The reason will break your heart. Subscribe to Wild Sky Stories' new emotional tales every day. The afternoon sun painted golden ribbons across the weathered floorboards of the Silver Dust Café as Lillian Hayes wiped down the counter for the third time. She had been working at the small establishment for only 2 weeks, having arrived in Sagebrush Hollow after her father passed away, and left her with nothing but an old photograph of a town she had never seen, and a letter that simply read, "Go there, find your peace." The cafe was quiet this time of day, caught in that drowsy space between the lunch crowd and the evening supper rush. Most folks were still working the ranches or tending to business in the small western town that seemed frozen in a kinder, simpler time. Lillian pushed a strand of dark hair behind her ear and looked up when the door creaked open. She watched an elderly man step inside, his boots worn thin at the heels, his hat faded from years of sun and rain. He moved slowly, carefully, as if each step required consideration, but there was something dignified in his bearing that made her heart soften immediately. He must have been close to 80 years old, she guessed, with a face carved by decades of wind and weather. His eyes, though, were what caught her attention. They were pale blue, almost silver, and held within them a depth of emotion that seemed bottomless. Without speaking, the old cowboy made his way to a table in the corner by the window. It was a table for two, with mismatched wooden chairs that had seen better days. He pulled out one chair and lowered himself into it with a quiet grunt, then placed his hat on his knee. Lillian began walking toward him with a menu, but something made her pause. The old man was looking at the empty chair across from him, not just looking but gazing, as if he saw someone there that no one else could see. Then slowly, deliberately, he lifted his worn hat from his knee and tipped it toward the empty seat. "Afternoon, my darling," he said, his voice rough but tender. "Beautiful day we got ourselves today." Lillian felt her breath catch in her throat. She stepped back slightly, not wanting to intrude on whatever sacred ritual this was. From behind the counter, Martha Dawson, the cafe owner, appeared at her side. "First time seeing him?" Martha whispered, her voice carrying the weight of knowing. Lillian nodded, unable to take her eyes off the old cowboy. "That is Samuel Mercer," Martha said quietly. "Been coming here every single day for the past 7 years. Same time, same table, same chair." Lillian watched as Samuel began talking softly to the empty seat, his weathered hands folded on the table as if in prayer. Every now and then, he would pause and nod, as if listening to a response that only he could hear. "Who is he talking to?" Lillian asked, though she feared she already knew the answer. Martha sighed, a sound heavy with years of witnessing this daily devotion. Her name was Rosemary, his wife of 54 years. She passed on 7 winters ago, right here in this town. Lillian felt something twist in her chest. "And he comes here every day." "Every single day," Martha confirmed. "Rain or shine, summer or winter. This was their table. They came here every afternoon for over 30 years. Sat right there, drank coffee, talked about everything and nothing. When Rosemary died, we all thought Samuel would follow quick after. But he kept coming, said he made her a promise, and a Mercer never breaks a promise." Lillian watched the old cowboy reach across the table and touch the empty chair, his fingers brushing against the wood as if touching something infinitely precious. "What was the promise?" she asked. Martha shook her head slowly. "That is not my story to tell. But if you want to know, you could ask him. Samuel loves telling stories about his Rosemary. Keeps her alive, he says." For the next hour, Lillian went about her work, but her eyes kept drifting to the corner table. She brought Samuel his coffee, black with 2 spoons of sugar, just as Martha had instructed. When she set down the cup, she noticed he had ordered 2. "The second one is for her," he said, catching her curious glance. His voice was gentle, without a hint of embarrassment. She always took hers with cream, no sugar, said life was sweet enough already. Lillian felt tears prick at her eyes. "That is beautiful, sir." Samuel looked up at her then, really looked, and something in his gaze seemed to recognize a kindred pain. "You have lost someone too," he said. "It was not a question. My father," Lillian admitted. 3 months ago." Samuel nodded slowly. "Loss carves rivers through our hearts. But those rivers, they carry love. They never dry up, not really. Not if you tend to them." Lillian did not know what to say, so she simply placed a hand briefly on his shoulder before returning to her work. Days turned into weeks, and Lillian found herself looking forward to Samuel's daily visits. She learned to have his coffee ready at precisely 4 in the afternoon. She learned that he preferred the window open just a crack, even when the autumn air turned crisp, because Rosemary had loved the smell of approaching evening. Sometimes she would linger nearby, refilling salt shakers or wiping already clean tables, just to hear fragments of his one-sided conversations. "Saw young Thomas Mitchell today," he would say to the empty chair. "Finally proposed to that Abigail girl. You always said those two would end up together. You were right, as usual. Or, the horses are doing fine. That new mare reminds me of the one we bought for our first anniversary. Remember her? Wild as a summer storm until ooh sang to her." Each visit ended the same way. Samuel would finish his coffee, carefully place enough coins on the table to cover both cups, plus a generous tip, then stand slowly, his joints protesting the movement. He would push his chair in, then walk around to push in the empty chair across from him. And before he left, he would tip his hat one more time to the empty seat. "Until tomorrow, my love," he would say. "Save me a dance in your dreams." One particularly cold afternoon in late November, the cafe was empty except for Samuel and Lillian. The wind howled outside, sending leaves skittering past the frosted windows. Samuel seemed more tired than usual, his movements slower, his voice softer. Lillian brought his coffee, and gathering her courage asked, "Mr. Mercer, would you mind if I sat with you for a moment? It is quiet today, and I would very much like to hear about Rosemary, if you are willing to share." Samuel's face brightened like the sun breaking through clouds. "Please," he said, gesturing to a third chair that Lillian pulled over from another table. "She would have liked you. She always had a soft spot for young women finding their way in this world." Lillian sat, her hands wrapped around her own cup of coffee for warmth. "How did you meet her?" Samuel smiled, and 50 years fell away from his face. "It was the summer of 1869. I was 22 years old, full of foolish pride and empty pockets. I had ridden into town looking for ranch work, and the only person willing to give a dusty drifter a chance was old Henry Dawson, Martha's father-in-law. He owned the ranch just north of here." He paused, his eyes drifting to the empty chair as if seeking permission to continue. Rosemary was his neighbor's daughter. She came riding by one afternoon while I was mending fences, had the longest red hair I ever saw, tied back with a blue ribbon that matched the sky. She looked at me like I was the most interesting thing she had seen all year, and I nearly put a nail through my hand because I could not stop staring back. Lillian laughed softly. "Love at first sight? More like confusion at first sight," Samuel admitted with a chuckle. I could not figure out why my heart was trying to escape my chest. Thought maybe I was coming down with something. But the next day, when she rode by again and I found myself running to the fence just to say hello, I started to understand. He told her about their courtship, how he would save every penny from his meager wages to buy Rosemary small gifts, a ribbon, a handkerchief, a book of poetry he could not read but knew she loved. He told her about the night he proposed, under a sky so full of stars that he had said, "I cannot give you diamonds, but I can promise to show you stars every night for the rest of our lives." He told her about their wedding, small and simple, in the little church that still stood at the edge of town. About the first home they built together, board by board, nail by nail. About the children they hoped for, but never had. and how they learned to fill their home with love anyway, becoming surrogate grandparents to every child in Sagebrush Hollow. "We had 54 years, Samuel said, his voice growing thick. 54 years of waking up beside her, of watching the seasons change together, of fighting sometimes because love is not always gentle, but always, always making peace before the sun set. That was our rule. Never go to sleep with anger in your heart." Lillian wiped at her eyes. "She sounds wonderful. She was everything," Samuel said simply. "And when she got sick, when the doctors said there was nothing more to be done, she made me promise 3 things." He held up one weathered finger. "First, that I would not give up on living. She said she did not spend 54 years teaching me how to be happy, just to have me forget it all the moment she was gone." A second finger joined the first. "Second, that I would accompany me here every day. This was our place. She said as long as I kept coming, kept talking to her, she would hear me. She would be waiting." He looked at the empty chair, and Lillian saw his chin tremble slightly. "And third, that when my time finally came, I would not be afraid. She said she would be there, on the other side, ready to take my hand and walk me home." Lillian could not stop the tears now. They fell freely down her cheeks as she reached across and took Samuel's hand. His skin was paper-thin and cool, but his grip was surprisingly strong. "The truth is," Samuel continued, "some folks in town think I have lost my mind. They see an old man talking to an empty chair and they feel sorry for me, but they do not understand. This chair is not empty to me. Every day I see her sitting there, young and beautiful as the day I met her. I smell the lavender soap she always used. I hear her laugh when I tell her about the silly things happening in town." He squeezed Lillian's hand. "Love does not end when someone dies. It just changes shape. It becomes memory, becomes hope, becomes the reason you get up in the morning even when your bones ache and your heart is heavy." Lillian thought about her father, about the grief that had driven her to this small town in search of something she could not name. "How do you keep going?" she whispered. "How do you carry that much love and loss and still find reasons to smile?" Samuel was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, worn photograph. He handed it to Lillian. The image showed a young woman with flowing hair and a smile that seemed to radiate warmth even through the faded sepia tones. She was sitting in a chair, her head tilted slightly, her eyes full of mischief and joy. "I look at this every night before I sleep and every morning when I wake," Samuel said, "and I remember that I am not just carrying loss, I am carrying love. And love, true love, it does not weigh you down. It lifts you up." He took the photograph back and pressed it gently to his heart before returning it to his pocket. "Your father, did he love you?" Lillian nodded, fresh tears spilling over. "Then he is still with you," Samuel said with absolute certainty. "In every breath you take, every choice you make, every moment of kindness you show to a stranger. Love is the thread that connects us across time, across distance, across even death itself." They sat together in comfortable silence as the afternoon light began to fade. Finally, Samuel finished his coffee and began his ritual of preparing to leave. Lillian stood and watched him push in both chairs, then reach for his hat. But before he tipped it to the empty seat, he turned to her. "Lillian," he said, using her name for the first time, "thank you for listening. Most people are too busy or too uncomfortable to sit with an old man and his memories. But you have given me a gift today. You have given me one too," she said. "Why, you have shown me that grief does not have to be the end of the story. It can be the beginning of something new." Samuel smiled, and for just a moment, Lillian saw the young cowboy he had once been, fearless and full of hope. He tipped his hat to her, then turned to the empty chair and performed his daily farewell. "Until tomorrow, my love, save me that dance." As he walked slowly toward the door, Lillian felt something shift inside her. The weight she had been carrying since her father's death seemed lighter somehow, transformed from a burden into a bridge. The next afternoon, Lillian was ready with Samuel's coffee at precisely 4 o'clock. But 4 came and went, and the corner table remained empty. By 4:30, a cold dread began to settle in her stomach. At 5 o'clock, Martha came out from the back, her face pale and her eyes red. Lillian knew before a word was spoken. "When?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "In his sleep last night," Martha said. "The doctor said he went peaceful." Had that old photograph clutched in his hand and a smile on his face. Lillian moved slowly to the corner table. The late afternoon light still streamed through the window, painting golden ribbons across the worn wood. She touched the back of Samuel's chair, then looked at the empty seat across from it, but it did not feel empty anymore. In her mind, she saw them there, both of them, young and beautiful, holding hands across the small table. She saw Rosemary laughing at something Samuel said, saw him reaching over to tuck a strand of red hair behind her ear. She saw 54 years of love, compressed into a single moment of perfect joy. Lillian sank into the third chair she had pulled over the day before and let herself weep. But these tears were different from the ones she had shed for her father. These tears carried not just grief, but gratitude. She thought about what Samuel had said, about love being a thread that connects us across time and distance, and death. She thought about her father and the photograph of Sagebrush Hollow that had led her here. She thought about how strange and wonderful it was that she had arrived just in time to hear an old cowboy's story, and she realized that she had found what she came looking for: peace, not the absence of pain, but the presence of purpose. The understanding that love endures, that memory is sacred, and that the people we lose continue to shape us in ways we cannot always see. Lillian wiped her eyes and stood up slowly. She walked back to the counter and found a small vase, which she filled with wildflowers from the jar Martha kept by the kitchen door. She carried the vase to the corner table and set it in the center between the 2 empty chairs. Then she did something she had never done before. She picked up Samuel's hat, which Martha had set aside on the counter, and placed it gently on his chair. She poured 2 cups of coffee, one black with 2 sugars, one with cream, and she sat down in the third chair and raised her own cup in a toast. "To Samuel and Rosemary," she said softly, her voice steady despite the tears. "May your dance never end." The cafe was quiet. The afternoon light continued its slow journey across the floor, and somewhere, Lillian liked to believe, an old cowboy was finally keeping his promise, walking hand in hand with his love toward a horizon that never ended. From that day forward, Lillian kept the corner table special. She placed fresh flowers there every morning and made sure no one sat there during the 4 o'clock hour. When curious visitors asked about the 2 cups of coffee she placed there each afternoon, she would smile and tell them the story of a cowboy who taught her that love never dies. It just changes shape. And on quiet afternoons, when the light was just right and the wind whispered through the cracked window, Lillian could almost see them there. 2 empty chairs that were not empty at all, filled with a love that would echo through Sagebrush Hollow for generations to come. Years later, when Lillian had grown old herself, having found love and built a life in the town that had healed her, she would come to the corner table and sit in that third chair. She would tell her grandchildren about an old cowboy and his Rosemary, about promises kept in love that transcended death. And when the children asked if the story was true, Lillian would look at those 2 empty chairs and smile. Every word she would say, every single word. Then she would tip an invisible hat toward the window, where the afternoon sun still painted golden ribbons across the weathered floor, and whisper, "Save me a dance, Samuel. I will be there someday. But not yet. Not just yet." And somewhere, in a place beyond time and grief, she knew he was smiling,